Officer Jackson leaned back in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, his eyes lazily scanning the streets of the South End. The sun had barely risen, casting long orange streaks across the pavement, and most of the city was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. For Jackson, this was the best time of day, quiet, slow, predictable, or so he thought. He wasn't new to these streets. He'd been patrolling this predominantly black neighborhood for the past 7 years, and somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing the people as individuals. He saw patterns, suspicious behavior, signs, as he called them, baggy pants, hoodies, loud laughter, eye contact held a little too long. His mind had become a checklist, not of law, but of assumptions. He liked to think he had a sixth sense, a gut feeling that told him when something was off. And today, that gut was twitching. The radio crackled. Unit 14, report on Willow and 5th. Suspicious activity reported. Male, mid-30s, black, wearing a suit. Caller says he looks out of place. Jackson scoffed. A black man in a suit. That had to be suspicious, right? He tossed the thermos onto the passenger seat, shifted the cruiser into gear, and pulled out with practiced ease. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. As he neared the intersection, he spotted him, standing near a corner store, dressed immaculately in a tailored navy blue suit, talking calmly on his phone. He looked relaxed, confident, too confident. Jackson slowed to a crawl, steadying the man. He hated that feeling, when someone didn't show fear, especially someone like him. Something in Jackson's chest tightened. He parked, took a breath, and stepped out. Today, he told himself, was just another routine day, just another routine stop. But something deep inside him knew, this day would be anything but routine. Officer Jackson approached with slow, deliberate steps. His boots echoed on the cracked sidewalk like warning shots. The man on the phone noticed him from the corner of his eye but didn't flinch, didn't lower his voice, didn't hang up. That bothered Jackson more than it should have. "Excuse me," Jackson said, his tone already laced with suspicion. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The man glanced at him calmly, still holding the phone to his ear. "Just finishing a call," he replied, his voice composed, almost too calm. Jackson frowned. No nervous shuffle, no panicked explanation, no sign of fear. Instead, confidence, presence. That suit, custom cut, polished shoes, a watch that probably cost more than Jackson made in a month. It all screamed power, and Jackson hated that. He didn't like feeling small on his own beat. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Jackson said, stepping closer. The man raised an eyebrow. "I'm not breaking any laws, officer. I'm standing on a public sidewalk. Is there a reason you're stopping me?" That tone, polite but firm, measured, it made Jackson clench his jaw. "I don't need a reason to ask for ID," Jackson lied. "You match the description of someone involved in suspicious activity." Now the man lowered his phone and looked at him directly, not defiantly, not submissively, just directly. "Suspicious because I'm black and wearing a suit?" The words hit like a slap, though they were spoken gently. Jackson's nostrils flared. "Don't play the race card with me. No card, officer, just facts." There it was, the calm defiance, the refusal to bow. Jackson felt heat rising in his neck. His hand twitched near his belt. He didn't even realize it, but he was already stepping into the spiral. And the man in the suit, he knew it. The silence between them was thick, not the calm kind, but the one that trembles right before a storm breaks loose. Officer Jackson squared his shoulders. His instincts were on fire, screaming at him that he was losing control of the situation. He wasn't used to pushback, not from black men on the street, not like this. He stepped closer, narrowing the distance between them. "I asked for your ID. This is your last chance." The man stood his ground. "Last chance for what, officer? I haven't committed a crime. I'm standing here, peacefully, talking on the phone. You approached me. You escalated this." That calm tone again. It was like a mirror reflecting everything Jackson didn't want to see, his insecurity, his bias, his hunger for control. Jackson's hand moved instinctively to his belt. He unclipped the radio. "Dispatch. This is Unit 14. I've got an uncooperative suspect at Willow and 5th, requesting backup." The man blinked slowly, then spoke in a firm voice. "My name is Marcus, and I am not your suspect." But Jackson wasn't listening anymore. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, stepping forward. Now, Marcus raised his hand slightly, still composed. "You're making a mistake." Jackson didn't care. His blood was boiling. The man's calm was infuriating. It felt like mockery, like he knew something Jackson didn't. You think you're special, huh? Jackson muttered, circling him. Wearing your fancy suit, walking around like you own the damn block. That doesn't mean the rules don't apply to you. I've followed every rule, Marcus said. You're the one breaking protocol. But Jackson had stopped hearing anything but his own rage. He reached out, grabbed Marcus by the wrist, and twisted his arm behind his back with a violent jerk. The man stumbled but didn't resist. Stop resisting, Jackson shouted. Even though there was no resistance, he shoved Marcus face first against the brick wall. A crack rang out, his phone hit the pavement, shattering. People across the street began filming. One woman shouted, "He didn't do anything." Another man called out, "That's police brutality." Jackson's breath was heavy, sweat rolled down his forehead. Still, he pressed Marcus harder into the wall, cuffing him roughly. "You're under arrest," he growled. "For what?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. "We'll figure that out at the station," Jackson snapped. And just like that, it was done. But as he led Marcus to the patrol car, with the eyes of the crowd burning holes into his back, a whisper of unease finally crept in. It was the look in Marcus's eyes, not fear, not anger, but disappointment. Something was very, very wrong. He just didn't know it yet. Before we move on, let's take a short pause. Tell us in the comments where you're watching or listening from. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever faced unfair treatment by police or authority? We want to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. Now, let's continue. The patrol car door slammed shut behind Marcus with a cold, metallic thud. Officer Jackson pulled into traffic, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, jaw clenched, knuckles white. "Uncooperative suspect, my ass," he muttered under his breath, casting a glance at Marcus through the rearview mirror. But Marcus wasn't looking at him. He was staring out the window, calm, unreadable, no pleading, no panic. Just silence. That silence made Jackson more nervous than any insult or outburst ever could. Dispatch crackled through the radio. "Unit 14, confirm location and ETA to Central. 10 minutes out," Jackson replied. "Copy that. Be advised, Lieutenant Adams is at the precinct. He wants an update as soon as you arrive." Jackson frowned. Lieutenant Adams? That was unusual. He rarely got involved in street arrests unless something big was going down. The name hovered in Jackson's mind for a moment like a shadow he couldn't place. Then Marcus finally spoke. "You're going to regret this." Jackson smirked, glancing at him in the mirror again. "Yeah, threatening a police officer now? Bad move." "It's not a threat," Marcus replied, voice even. "It's a prediction." The tone was so certain, so absolute, that it lingered in the car like a warning bell. Jackson felt a ripple of unease again but buried it under layers of arrogance. When they arrived at the precinct, Jackson yanked open the back door and pulled Marcus out. Cameras flashed. Local reporters were already gathering outside the building. Tipped off by someone, a crowd was forming too. A few shouted, "Justice for Marcus! Stop the racial profiling!" Jackson blinked. "Wait, they know his name?" He turned to Marcus sharply. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus turned to face him, finally meeting his eyes. "I told you, my name is Marcus." They stepped through the precinct doors. Inside, officers froze mid-step. Conversation stopped. All eyes landed on Marcus, and then flicked to Jackson. Some jaws literally dropped. "Jackson," someone whispered behind the front desk. "Do you know who that is?" Jackson was still processing when a booming voice echoed through the lobby. "Let him go, now." Lieutenant Adams stepped into view, face pale, lips pressed tight with fury. He pointed directly at Marcus. "That man is Marcus Hale, Deputy Director of Internal Affairs." Time stopped. Jackson felt his stomach turn to stone. The man in the expensive suit was one of the highest-ranking officials in the entire department. A hush fell over the precinct. Marcus looked at Jackson one last time. "Now you get to answer the questions." The walls of interrogation room number 3 were cold and bare, painted in dull gray, like the inside of a coffin. The single overhead light buzzed faintly, casting shadows across Officer Jackson's face as he sat at the metal table, no longer the predator, but now the prey. For the first time in his career, he wasn't asking questions. He was waiting to answer them. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Adams entered with 2 other officers, one from Internal Affairs, the other from Legal. They didn't say a word, just sat across from him. Then came Marcus. No handcuffs, no escort, just confidence. He took a seat across from Jackson and opened a folder. Photos, a transcript of the dispatch call, witness videos, Social media posts already going viral. Jackson's mouth went dry. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You grabbed me without probable cause. You issued a false call to dispatch, claiming resistance. You used excessive force. And all of this, he gestured to the folder, is already on every major news outlet. Jackson stammered. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Marcus interrupted, voice like ice. You didn't care who I was. All you saw was a black man in a suit, and you decided he didn't belong. The room fell silent. Adams leaned forward, his face unreadable. Do you deny any part of this, Officer Jackson? Jackson hesitated. For a split second, he considered lying. Then his eyes flicked to the screen in the corner, playing a looped video of him slamming Marcus against the wall. I thought he was being evasive. Marcus didn't blink. I told you my name. You never asked for anything else. Jackson dropped his gaze. The internal affairs officer finally spoke. You're suspended effective immediately, pending full investigation. Your badge and weapon, now. Jackson's hand shook slightly as he reached for the badge on his chest. When he laid it on the table, the sound echoed like a death sentence. Then came the final blow. Marcus slid a paper across the table, a formal complaint, personal, direct, from him, not just as a victim, but as Deputy Director of Internal Affairs. You'll be hearing from my office again soon, he said, and this time, you won't be behind the badge. As Jackson was escorted out of the room, the corridor felt longer than ever. The eyes of his colleagues, once full of camaraderie, now held distance, discomfort, and quiet judgment. His world was beginning to crumble, and it was only the beginning. By morning, the video had already reached 3 million views. News anchors repeated the same words across every major station. A high-ranking black official was wrongfully arrested in a racially charged confrontation with a white police officer. Clips of the footage played on a loop, Marcus being slammed into the wall. Jackson's aggressive tone. The expression on Marcus's face, calm, steady, humiliated, but not broken. The department scrambled for damage control. Press statements were issued. An internal review was promised, but the damage was done. Outside the precinct, a growing sea of people gathered. Placards read, Justice for Marcus Hale. Black-skinned criminal. Fire Jackson. The crowd was diverse with black, white, Latino, young, old, united by one thing, fury. The kind of fury that doesn't disappear quietly. Reporters shoved microphones at anyone in uniform. Is this how you treat your own leadership? What does this say about the culture within the department? And then came Marcus. He stepped outside the precinct in front of the cameras, wearing the same tailored suit, standing tall. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. But his voice cut deeper than any megaphone. I wasn't just arrested as a black man, he said. I was arrested because someone refused to see past the color of my skin, and that someone wears a badge. Gasps, murmurs, some applauded, some just stood in silence. But I'm not the only one, Marcus continued. There are thousands who don't have the privilege of being recognized, who don't have a title to protect them, who get thrown to the ground and never get an apology, or justice. His voice trembled for a moment, not with fear, but with restrained rage. And if this can happen to me, imagine what's happening to those without a voice. The crowd erupted. The movement now had a face, a name, a fire. Back inside the building, Jackson watched it all unfold on a small mounted TV in a side room, alone, stripped of his badge. His career, already teetering on the edge, now seemed destined to collapse. His phone buzzed. A message from his wife. What did you do, Eric? He didn't reply. Outside, the chants grew louder. Inside, a man sat in silence, as the weight of the world turned against him. And Marcus? He didn't just walk away that day. He marched forward, with an army behind him. The precinct had never been this quiet. You could feel the tension in the air, like the moment before a storm. When the skies hold their breath, officers avoided eye contact. Conversations turned into whispers. The break room stood empty, the coffee untouched. Marcus's return to the building wasn't met with applause. It was met with unease. He walked through the halls, head high, back straight, but even he could feel it, the eyes watching from doorways, the murmurs when he passed. Because now, it wasn't just about race. Now, it was about loyalty. Some called him brave. Others, a traitor. Behind closed doors, the whispers turned into plans. A group of officers, loyal to Jackson, had created a chat thread, titled Protect the Shield. In it, they referred to Marcus as the enemy within. They believed the department should handle its own, without public trials, without civilian oversight. They believed Marcus had broken the code. But Marcus wasn't backing down. That morning, he'd signed off on the suspension of 2 other officers who had falsified reports in the past, men Jackson had vouched for. The message was clear: no more protection, no more looking the other way. And that's when it happened. An anonymous leak, an internal memo, detailing years of suppressed complaints, racial bias patterns, and cover-ups, was sent to every major news outlet: CNN, the New York Times, even international press. The building went into lockdown. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters swarmed the front steps. The world was watching, again. Inside, chaos brewed. Lieutenant Adams barged into Marcus's office, slamming the folder down. "This is war, Marcus. You understand that, right?" Marcus looked up, unshaken. "No, Lieutenant. This is truth." Adams's jaw clenched. "You've turned the department against itself." "No," Marcus replied, rising to his feet. "They did that the moment they chose silence over justice." That night, someone keyed Marcus's car in the staff garage. The next day, a photo of his family was taped to his locker, with a red X drawn over it. But he didn't flinch. He stood in front of every officer during roll call and said, "If you think doing the right thing makes me your enemy, then maybe you were never on the right side to begin with." Some looked away. But a small few, stood straighter, their eyes filled with something new. Respect. The first brick flew through the window at 9 p.m. It wasn't the start of a riot, not yet, but it was the spark, the moment when tension in the streets went from a simmer to a full boil. The protests had escalated, and now, they weren't just about Marcus Hale, they were about the system. They were about every time someone like Marcus had been wronged and forgotten. The crowd wasn't just angry, they were determined. They chanted slogans, they raised fists, they shouted at the cops. But the police didn't just stand by. The force had come out in full riot gear, and things quickly began to deteriorate. The first brick shattered the glass, followed by more. The crowd roared in approval. They weren't going to just march. They were going to break through the silence the city had lived in for so long. And inside the police station, it was no better. Lieutenant Adams had just finished speaking to the mayor. The conversation hadn't gone well. The mayor was no longer defending Jackson. There was no way to downplay the viral videos, the protests, the leak. People were demanding change. They wanted someone to take the fall, and Jackson was looking more and more like the scapegoat. But the department wasn't just about one man. It was about the system, and that was what Adams feared most. A knock on his office door broke his thoughts. "Sir, we've got a problem," one of the officers said. Adams stood up, already knowing what was coming. "They've breached the perimeter? Worse, we just got a call from the media. They found out about the secret meetings, about the cover-ups." Adams's blood ran cold. The very thing they had worked to bury was coming to light. Every corner of corruption they had hidden in the dark was about to be exposed. And the worst part? No one could stop it now. The city had exploded. It started with protests, but it didn't end there. What began as an outpouring of frustration and anger grew into something much larger, a movement. People from all walks of life joined in, filling the streets with chants, with signs, with voices demanding change. They weren't just demanding justice for Marcus Hale anymore. They were demanding the whole system be restructured. News outlets were still relentless, picking apart every detail, every leak, every corruption case in the department. The mayor, once hesitant, was now fully on board with an investigation. But as the world watched, the real battle was happening behind closed doors. The police force had been fractured. Not all officers were loyal to the old guard. Some were beginning to question their role in the system. But that wasn't the case for Lieutenant Adams. Adams was a man of the old school, and he had made it clear to his subordinates, "We protect our own, always." In his office, the pressure was mounting. The phone calls from the mayor's office were becoming more frequent and more insistent. The media demanded answers, and worst of all, the public was no longer on their side. Adams slammed his fist on the desk. "This ends now. We can't afford to lose control." The phone rang. It was a call from someone he didn't expect. "Adams, it's Marcus," came the voice on the other end. There was no anger, no frustration, just calm determination. "The whole department is about to change, and you can either be part of the change or be part of the problem." Adams's eyes narrowed. He had already seen the way Marcus had shaken things up, but this felt different. There was something final in Marcus's tone. The walls were closing in, and Adams could feel the pressure. "We'll see about that," Adams replied coldly. "Don't think you can walk into this system and change it overnight. But Marcus had already done what no one else dared. He'd exposed the truth. The next morning, the news hit. The department's internal affairs division was under investigation, and several high-ranking officers, including Jackson, were being placed on administrative leave. The night was restless. Marcus stood by the window in his small apartment, staring out into the chaos that had consumed the city. The protests had reached their peak, and the streets were filled with smoke, the air heavy with the scent of burning debris. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the flashing lights of police cars reflected off the buildings, turning the night into a fractured kaleidoscope of red and blue. Inside, the phone rang again. Marcus had been avoiding it, but he knew who it was. It was the mayor's office. 4 days, they had tried to reach him, but he refused to take their calls. They were offering him deals, suggesting he take a step back, let the department handle things their way. They told him he had caused enough disruption. But Marcus wasn't going to back down. He'd come too far to let the system swallow him whole. The phone rang a third time, and Marcus finally answered. Marcus, the voice on the other end was strained. You need to stop this. The city is on the brink of collapse. The media is calling for action. If you don't cooperate, this will only get worse. Marcus took a deep breath, his jaw tight. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been hurt by this system. You can't just throw a few names under the bus and expect everything to go back to normal. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, the mayor spoke again, his voice quiet. What do you want? I want accountability, Marcus replied, his voice firm. I want justice for every single person who's been wronged by your department. The mayor hesitated. We can't promise you that, Marcus. Then we're done, Marcus said, slamming the phone down. The decision had been made. The city was on the brink of collapse. After days of protests, threats, and media manipulation, Marcus finally found himself in the heart of the storm. The walls were closing in, and everything he had fought for seemed to be slipping away. The department, the mayor, and the system had turned against him, and they were prepared to make an example out of him. But Marcus wasn't afraid anymore. He stood in front of the courthouse, the place where everything had started, and where it was all going to end. The air was thick with anticipation. The people had gathered once more, their faces filled with defiance and hope. They had followed him this far, and now they were waiting for him to lead them to the final showdown. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. The judge, the prosecutor, and even some of Marcus's closest allies had turned on him. They had sold out, driven by fear and the promise of power. But Marcus wasn't alone. The people were with him. They had become his shield and his sword. As Marcus walked into the courtroom, he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Every step felt like it was echoing through time, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had lost. He knew that this would be his final stand, win or lose. It was the last chance to make things right. The prosecutor began to speak, but Marcus interrupted him. I didn't do this alone, he said, his voice strong. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been silenced, everyone who has been wronged by this system. And if you think you can crush us, you're wrong. You can't. The room fell silent. The prosecutor glared at him, but Marcus didn't back down. You've already lost, Marcus said quietly, because the people are awake, and they will never go back to sleep. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Marcus knew that this fight was more than just a legal battle. It was a battle for the soul of the city, for the future. The system had been exposed for what it was, and it couldn't hide anymore.